Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today I'm sitting down with Hannah Orenstein, who wrote the new rom-com Meant to Be Mine, out everywhere today. I've been a fan of Hannah's writing for quite some time. I loved her book, Head Over Heels. And when I saw that she was writing a new book, I knew I had to have her on the podcast so we could talk about everything from our love for Jewish food to what it's like to be a Jewish romance writer and everything in between. This book was unlike anything I've ever read. And it was so much fun to sit down with Hannah to learn more about her writing process, how she became an author, and the genesis behind this story since it's so unique. So this was a really fun conversation and I can't wait for you all to hear it. So without further ado, my conversation with author Hannah Orenstein starts right now. Welcome, Hannah, to the podcast. I'm so happy you're here. I read Head Over Heels a few months ago, like almost a year ago, I want to say. And I loved it because I was looking for more like romances with strong Jewish rep. And that's kind of how I stumbled upon you. And then when I heard you were writing a second book and when I literally read the synopsis and I was like, oh my God, it's about like a girl trying to find like her soulmate. I was like, I need to have her on this podcast to talk about it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. And it's definitely my most Jewish book yet. All of them are Jewish, but this is like the really Jewish one.
I know. And I love that. That's literally like a whole book about finding your like basher you're meant to be. So like too good of a premise. But before we talk about the book and how you came up with the idea and all of that, I'd love to hear first more about you and your writing. I know that you also work in like journalism, you're in magazines. So tell me about like your life kind of before writing and how writing as an author came to be.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Boston and I loved magazines as a kid and I always wanted to work in magazines. And so I went to NYU to study journalism and history. It was the only school I applied to. I didn't want to be a student. I wanted to be like a New Yorker who just happened to take classes, which was the perfect arrangement for me. And I was doing journalism classes. I was interning at magazines. I loved it. But by the time I graduated, magazines had basically died. So that was no longer a path for me. But I did two things. I had a job as a matchmaker. It was my first job sort of between junior and senior year of college. And it really took my career in a direction I never expected.
Wait.
Yeah.
No, you can't go further. Hang on. A matchmaker. Okay. Cause I don't like a lot of my listeners and viewers are obviously Jewish. And like when I think of matchmaker, I think of like from Fiddler on the Roof. Like, I don't know I didn't know that like matchmaking was an actual, especially in North America, that matchmaking was an actual job. Like I know in Israel, that's like a big thing, but Jewish matchmaking, like just general matchmaking, like what do you mean?
Okay. For rich New Yorkers, essentially. And God. I was 21. My clients were in their 30s and 40s and they wanted to get married. I had no idea how to get married. And the experience was so bizarre that like right after that, I took a creative writing class and I wrote a short story about it. And they were like, this has to be a book. So that became my first book, Playing with Matches. And so that's
my God,
how I got into this world.
That's so crazy.
On the side also.
But so what exactly went into being a matchmaker? Like, can you walk me through your everyday life?
It was wild. It was 2014. So it was the year that dating apps were just starting to really explode. And so I would have my clients, like if you were my client, right? Like we would go out for like dinner or drinks or whatever. And I would get to know you and your entire life story and your type and what you're into and what you're looking for in a relationship and what your values are and your lifestyle, what you don't want in a person. And then I would go out and I would find them and we would have my company had this huge database of people and I would like go through it and call them and be like, hi, what do you think about this person? And then I would set up dates, or if I didn't find anybody in the database, I would like go on Tinder. I would go on, did Bumble? Yeah, Bumble barely existed. Bumble was like a day old. Tons of other apps, including like apps for niche communities. So like JDate, JSwipe.
Right.
That kind of thing.
That's nuts.
And then babysit and like wait until like 9:00 and be like, hey, like, how did the date go? Tell me all about it.
Oh my God. So did you have like a high success rate? Oh, okay. I actually can't imagine that that's easy for like an outside third party person to like be involved in somebody's relationship and like find them match. Like that to me, that sounds so hard. Like I remember when I was on the apps for me, it was hard for me to find someone for me. So to have somebody else try to intervene and be like, what would this person like? That sounds so tough.
It's easier in some ways, and it's also harder because, I get to, or I got to like leap over sort of all the things that are holding you back. Not you personally, but things that are holding it back. It was a wild ride. So that's my first book, Playing with Matches.
Crazy. And you went to a creative writing class, you wrote it into a book, and that's how that whole situation came to be. And then from there, what happened to now?
So then I started working at 17.com. So 17 had not yet died by that point, but I was writing for the website. I was there for 2 years, and then I switched over to Elite Daily to work as an editor, and I'm still there now. And I run their dating vertical. So overseeing stories about single life, dating, relationships, breakups, sex, sexuality, and sexual health.
Oh my God. So you're the editor. So do you have like a staff, like a writing staff that come and pitch you stories? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, we have a great team of writers.
That's so fun. So Meant to Be Mine is obviously your newest book. And there's so many things that I loved about it, but it really felt like a love letter to like so many aspects of Judaism, but obviously like the predominant thing is Jewish food in this book, which I was not expecting going into it. And I was creeping your Instagram the other day and I left a little comment because I saw that you had posted a few years ago that you were in a beautiful St. Viator bagel shirt with your dad. Was that your dad in the photo?
Yeah.
So tell me about like your Montreal connection and like if you've had Montreal Jewish food, like I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So my dad grew up in New York, but he went to McGill for school, for college and grad school. So he was in Montreal for close to a decade.
Okay.
And he loved the bagels so much that like we lived in the Boston suburbs, but he would I think one time he went to Canada to get some, but then we discovered this little store 20 minutes from us. And so he would just go pick them up once a week. And so I grew up on St. Viator bagels. I feel very lucky to be able to say that.
Yeah.
And then for Father's Day this year, I got me and him matching bagel t-shirts.
No, it's iconic. That shirt is amazing. And I grew up in Montreal, but I've been living in Toronto for the last almost 10 years. So every time I come home, I'm obviously craving a bagel, and now I'm kind of gluten-free and they really don't sit well with me, but it's worth to be in pain to just have that bagel. Anyway, so when I saw that photo, I was dying. I was like, oh my God, we're the same. We same Viator bagels. So good. Okay. Well, before we go more into this book, I would love if you could tell me and anyone listening, a little elevator pitch of what Meant to Be Mine is about.
So Meant to Be Mine focuses on a Jewish family, and the matriarch, Gloria, is this really iconic, fabulous New Yorker, kind of eccentric. And she has this gift where she can predict the day that every member of her family is going to meet the love of her life. She did it for herself, for her siblings, for her kids, and now for her grandkids. And Edie is her granddaughter. She's 29 years old. She's working as a stylist. She lives in Brooklyn. And the book opens on her day. And she meets somebody, and things do not go the way that she expected or the way that she necessarily thought they would. And so some things happen. She has to make some difficult choices. So the book is really about fate versus free will, but also, the expectations that so many of us place on ourselves to have a specific timeline or a relationship that looks a certain way at a certain point in your life. So I loved writing it. I really had a great time.
And at the beginning of the book, right when you open it, there's this beautiful letter / dedication, if you will, to your grandparents, right? So how come that was important for you to put at the beginning right there of the book and just acknowledge them right off the bat? Because I know you also wrote a really nice note at the end of the book, but it's right there at the beginning too.
So you actually got the galley, which has that. It's not in the final copy.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but I can tell it for people listening. So basically usually a galley, the editor will send out a note that's here's why I liked the book. Here's why I think you'll enjoy it. But for this one, because the book has such a personal connection to my own life and my own family, my editor said, do you want to write it? And so I did. And so I wrote about a couple things. I wrote about starting to write the book at the beginning stages of the pandemic. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But I also wrote about, during the pandemic, one of the things that I really, really wanted to do, I feel like we all had this light at the end of the tunnel thing, the one thing I'm going to do when it's safe, you know? And for me, it was, I wanted to hug my grandparents, my mom's parents. And I just kept thinking about that. And then while I was writing the book, actually, they both died within a month of each other, less than that. And so it was awful. Yeah. And so I just thought Gloria is so much inspired by my family, especially my grandparents. And so I wanted to write about them, this galley letter, but then also in the letter, I talk about sort of secret like dates or numbers from my own family history that is the book. So my own grandparents' wedding anniversary is the day that Gloria meets her husband. My parents met on Christmas Eve. And so Edie meets her person on flight 1224. And there are other things like that. So I couldn't help scatter those in.
I loved it. And I love that before I even got into the story, like I got to learn so much about you and like the intention behind the book, which was so different than any other like e-arc or physical arc I've received. Cause like normally you don't get to know so much about the author before diving into their story, but I just got like this little piece of you that made the reading of the actual story so much more personal. And I just like loved that for that reason.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So you kind of brushed upon the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the fact that you started writing this book in the pandemic. So like, what are we talking, like March 2020? Are we talking June 2020? Like how far into the pandemic were we when you started?
It was April 1st, 2020.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the way I approached it really was like, I mean, also keep in mind, this is like 2 weeks into the pandemic, but I'm like, what are all of the things that I miss? Okay. I really miss wearing real clothes. I miss traveling. I miss going to live music and like other events like that. I miss my grandparents. And so Edie is a stylist. She's like working with real clothes that aren't sweatpants. And the person she winds up dating is a rock star and they go to concerts. There's some travel in the book to Maine and to Miami. There's a really fabulous grandma. So that's really where the book came from. And now looking back, it's crazy to think that that was like 2, maybe 3 weeks in.
Yeah. And like we thought like it was only going to be 2-3 weeks. And then it was like, literally here we are 2 years later. Like it's going on. It's so crazy.
Yep.
It's wild. So what was the intention when you were writing the book? Like, how did you come up with the idea of like, I don't even know how do you even call what Gloria's powers are? Like she's not like a matchmaker. She's like,
prophecy or prediction?
A prophecy? Okay. A prediction. Okay. Good. So how did you come up with this idea? Because it's a wild concept.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's 2 answers. The short answer is that my agent and I were talking about what my next book should be. And she was like, if you can boil a book down to 1 sentence, 1 question, that means your idea is really strong. And so I was just saying, what if this? What if that? And I literally was just like walking around my parents' neighborhood. I was living with them for a few months in a mask outside. And it just like clicked. And I was like, what if? And so that's where that came from. But, also I think like now looking back, there was so much uncertainty at that time for all of us, with our health, with the economy, with, our family, so much. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea of having like one element of your life so certain and you know exactly what's coming for you, I think there's something really comforting about that.
For sure.
Especially in this era where, none of us really know what's going on.
For sure. So like the obviously you mentioned this before, but like a main through line of this book is like free will versus fate, obviously. And I thought it was really interesting how you like really allow us to follow this person's journey of like very strong-headedly believing in fate and that this prophecy is real. And then it kind of obviously takes a turn where she's kind of smacked with a dose of reality where she's put in a position where maybe she does have some sort of power over herself and she does have like some free will. So was that hard for you to like navigate writing the book? Like at what point did you know, like, this is when she's going to make the decision? Like, how was that outlining process like?
It's a good question. I knew that she had to confront the real world at some point. And by real world, I just mean that there are, maybe other ways out there beyond just this, tradition or sort of mythology that her grandmother has created. And, I think we all kind of go through that. Like, we all grow up learning certain things and believing in certain things. And at a certain point, you just, you're confronted with another point of view. So I knew that it had to come after a death. And so initially I thought that Max was going to die. Max is her twin sister's fiance.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, doesn't quite work that way. And so what winds up happening in the book is that she finds out after her grandmother dies, Gloria dies in the book, that her twin sister actually did not meet her fiance on the day that she was supposed to. She fell in love with him a couple days before and just sort of ran with it. And so I realized that, I want to keep Max alive because they have this really beautiful love story, even if it's not the story that was prophesied for her.
Right.
So because Max lived, Gloria had to die. And I don't know, I think it ultimately wound up as a way for Edie to, in the process of grieving her, also just to reflect on all the really incredible things that she has received from her grandmother, but also reflecting on all the ways that, maybe her path can diverge. And that doesn't mean that she's not honoring her grandmother. It just means that maybe she does it in a different way.
For sure. And we're going to get to the big twist at the end of the book, which was so incredible. I had goosebumps. I did not see it coming at all. But before we get into like the romance part of it, I really want to talk to you about like the thick Jewish themes of this book, because I love a Jewish book always. And I really love a Jewish book that's like contemporary and the characters like look and feel like me. So that Rosh Hashanah scene was honestly everything, from like the details of the food to like how their family gathers and banters with one another. Like it just felt so familiar. Did you have to at all like push to have that included? Was that a very important thing that you wanted to have in the book? Like tell me about the Jewish background of that scene and like the themes of the book in general.
Yeah, well, that is the biggest compliment, that you said it feels familiar. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted. The Rosh Hashanah scene is literally my family. Like that's how we do holidays. So no, I didn't have to push. I think my editor knew from the start. I mean, we've worked on several books together. She knows that I'm Jewish. She knows that I like to write about my culture, but this is the most explicitly Jewish book. But no, there was never any pushback on that. There's also a mahjong scene, which
iconic.
It's kind of my favorite chapter in the book. I play mahjong. I have a mahjong league. I think I run like the only mahjong league in New York City of people under like 60.
I'm so jealous. I don't play, but like my mom actually doesn't play, but my boyfriend's mom plays, and like all my friends' moms play. And I'm such a gamer. I'm so interested in learning, and everyone's like, you're too young. I'm like, why? Why can't I be 28 and wanting to play? Like, yeah.
You have to learn. My friends and I do it with like wine.
Yeah, that's so fun.
Snacks with like a cheese board. Like it's just a great way to like gossip and hang out.
Wait, for people that don't know what mahjong is, you have to explain the Spark Note version of what it is.
So I call it Jewish ladies poker. It's a game. It's originally from China. In China, it's played very differently, but they have these little tiles, and you essentially like pass and trade the tiles in order to make a hand on a card, and you get a new card every year with different numbers on it. So that's the game. And yeah.
It's so fun. And when I was growing up, my grandma would play, and like she would have like the mahjong ladies come over. And I remember like sleeping over at her house on a weekend night, and like the mahjong ladies were over. So I had to like hide in the front room and watch TV, because like I couldn't be in the dining room where they were all sitting and like yapping. It's such like a nice thing. And now that I see like my friends' moms doing it, it's just like a nice sense of like community friendship. And I need to get my girls onto it, because I think it would be so fun.
You should. Yeah.
I love it. I love that it's in the book. But okay, back to the Jewish food of it all, because it's such a through line. And even in the back of the book, you have is it she your grandma? How did you refer to her? Like not your grandma, not your bubby. Okay.
My grandma, yeah.
Yeah. So you have her chicken soup recipe, which is iconic. So many people are so proprietary over their chicken soup recipes and like don't share recipes. So I love that you put this in there, because if I asked my mom for my grandma, she'd be like, hell no, like it's secret. So I love that you put it in here. But talk to me about like the importance of Jewish food in this book, because it's everywhere, from the chopped liver, like everything. It's so good.
Thank you so much. I just want to make people hungry.
Yeah.
But Jewish food, I think, kind of gets a bad rap, like outside the community. Like people think it's like bland, or like it's all sort of beige, and like it is all sort of beige, but it's delicious. It makes me feel close to my family, because it's, you eat the same food with the same people every year, and you have to make it. So there's a lot of chicken soup in the book. And so quick story to back up a couple of years ago. In 2018, I called my grandparents for a story that I was working on for Bustle. And I said, I need the soup recipe. I'm writing about chicken soup for Bustle. Can you please teach me how to make the soup? And I have a transcription of them teaching me over the phone how to make the soup. And it's like my grandma, like reeling off ingredients. And like in the background, you hear my grandpa shouting at her. And he's like, did you remember salt? Did you remember pepper? And she's like, shut up. It was amazing.
That's amazing.
And so I feel really lucky to have that, because now, that they're not here, I have the recipe. If I forget or like can't find an ingredient like in my phone, like it's all in Bustle, and so I just go there.
That's iconic. I love that.
Yeah. And so once the book was finished, there's a lot of chicken soup in the book, but once the book was finished, my editor was like, we have like one extra page in the book. Like, is there anything fun that you would want to throw in? And I was like, we're going to throw in Gloria's chicken soup recipe, which is really my grandma's chicken soup recipe.
I love that. Okay. So now let's get into like the romance part of the book, because obviously that's like my favorite thing to talk about, considering I love romance books and I love stories. So you took us on this like wild journey, because I didn't really know where it was going. Like when she first meets Theo on the plane, I like automatically was just like, I feel like there's somebody else in the airport that she didn't acknowledge. I was like trying to read every single line. I was like, is there somebody else she like bumped elbows with that is here, that is going to come back at the end. Like, I just felt that you were going to like take me on this trip, and you obviously did. But while I was reading it, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to be so invested in their relationship because I thought like I was right and there was going to be an expiry date. And we're talking about spoilers. There was an expiry date, but I just needed to give you a big compliment that not once did I feel like pulled out of the story or like not invested in their relationship. Like, it was so well written and they were so cute together that like, despite all of the obstacles, I really did think that they were going to make it work. And one of the obstacles, and it kind of goes back to what we just talked about, was the fact that Theo wasn't Jewish, but he was very much like open to the Jewish experience, especially when he went there for Rosh Hashanah and meeting her family and trying gefilte fish and then not needing to try it in the end. But that like open heartedness of him. And I just wanted to ask like what the inspiration was behind creating a character like that was so open to experiencing Jewishness from someone else's point of view.
Interesting question. First of all, thank you so much. I'm so happy you loved eating Theo. My sister had the biggest crush on Theo, which was like, I think it's hilarious.
No, I have so many questions about like how you imagined him, but we'll get there after.
I have a very specific inspiration for him, but I don't know. I mean, every non-Jewish person that I dated, I mostly date Jewish guys, but of the ones who weren't, like, I mean, they were super open to it. I remember in college, I called my mom and I was like, Mom, like I have a boyfriend. It was like my first boyfriend, such a big deal. And she's like, is he Jewish? And I was like, no, he went to Catholic school for 12 years. And she like thought it over for a second. And she was like, nice Jesuit boy. We still get the acronym. So I don't know. I feel like that's been a thing. I mean, in New York, everybody is kind of Jewish, even if they're not Jewish.
Right. Yes, 100%. I mean, I've been to New York a million times and it just feels like such a Jewish city, even though people are not Jewish, but like everyone has a Jewish friend, it's not like, so like a weird concept. When I went away to school, my first year, I went to school in Toronto, which is still very much a Jewish city in Canada. But I lived in residence, and somebody who lived on my floor came up to me one day and she was like, I have a question. I was like, yeah. She goes, the only other Jewish person I've ever heard of is Seth Cohen from the OC. And I was like, wow. Good. Like, I get that. I get that connection. Like, our last names are both Cohen. So good. And she goes, but I'm just like a bit confused, like why you're not wearing a little hat. I was like, okay, let me give you a little education right now on Jewish people. And that was my first like real experience, like interacting with somebody that did not know a damn thing about Judaism. And not to say that she was closed-minded, but she certainly wasn't as open to it as Theo was. So reading about him and their relationship and how they come from different religions and how like open he was to it was something very special. And it was also interesting to me how Edie was so open to dating somebody not Jewish, because I don't know, for whatever reason, she prioritized her Jewishness so much. And like, you could tell that it's such a vital part of her, but yet it wasn't a deal breaker for her, which I think is so interesting. And it's so important to like show that Judaism isn't only just one way, and people like relate to their religion in different ways. And just because you're Jewish doesn't mean that you wouldn't be open to not dating a Jewish person. So I'd like that was like intentional in her character as well.
Yeah. I think for Edie, Judaism is really about culture and it's about family.
Yeah.
And for her, that doesn't necessarily mean religion. And so if a person can hang with her family and just be open to, this tradition, this prophecy that her grandma has, come up with, I think that's so much more important to her than believing in a specific set of, religious values.
Right. For sure. So her relationship with Theo is like everything. And I'm such a trope person. And like my favorite thing ever in romance books, I mean, I have a lot of favorite things, but one of them is like, I'm a sucker for like rock star romances. So when I heard that he was like in a band and he was on that magazine that she was reading, I was like, oh my God, is this going to be like part of like of a rock star romance? And like, we definitely get some of those rock star vibes, but like, are you also into that? Like, is that why you included it? Like both of their careers are so interesting. And even in like Head Over Heels, the fact that they were gymnasts, like I feel like you tap into so many different worlds and so many different types of like, not odd careers, but like less common, I guess. And like, it's so cool because you get a glimpse into those worlds. So why was that important for you to include?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's pretty much where my books mostly start. So, I mean, my first book is about a matchmaker. My second book is set in the world of Instagram influencers and also the world of fine jewelry, just because I wanted to learn more about those worlds. So for this book, I just thought it would be fun to write about a rock star. I mean, it's like kind of sexy. It's, you don't date too many rock stars, or at least I haven't. So, I'm such a sucker for like books about famous people or like people just on the brink of fame. I think it's just like, I will eat them like candy. And so Theo was sort of my way of doing that. He's not famous yet, but he could be there at some point.
Yeah. And then when he writes a song about her and performs it and then it's on the radio, like that's just, and I love that you included the line. There's a line in there when she's riding in the Uber going to, I think the line's there. Maybe it's backstage after the concert, but there's a line somewhere in the book where she basically says like, she's not somebody who would normally get like mushy or like catch feels for something like this, to have a song written about her, but like, there's something nice about it. And I thought that was cool too, because you would think that any other person, like any other girl that gets a song written about her, that then is like on the radio, like would be freaking out. And she's just like, yeah, it's cool. Like she's so nonchalant about it. I love that about her too. Like she's just too cool for me.
Edie is probably the coolest person I've written. She's cooler than I am. Bow down to her. I would love to go out with her.
No, she's sick. She's sickening. And her job is so freaking cool. And then she gets to style like an amazingly epic human. But then comes in the whole Bennett of it all. And like Bennett, like threw me for a loop, because as I had mentioned at the very beginning, I was like reading that airport scene with a fine tooth comb, like, where is this person that's coming back later? And then like Bennett wasn't in that scene. So I was like, okay, well, it can't be him because there's somebody that's going to have to come back later. But it ended up being Bennett, and he's so sweet. And he's just like an ooey gooey cinnamon roll. So can you talk about the inspo behind him? How did you decide to like throw him in there? Cause he was very he crept in, like he wasn't a front runner at any point until the very end. So tell me about like all of that character building.
Yeah, I will. I also want to say the inspo for Theo, just before I forget,
yes,
is season 3 of Love Island UK.
Yes, Kay, that was the best season.
Best season. Okay, so Alex, just with like the tattoos.
Oh my God, I'm freaking dead.
That's what he looks like in my head.
That's iconic. Hey, I couldn't really figure out in my head. I don't know why. You know who Theo James is, the actor?
Yeah.
Okay, so in my head, Theo James, because Theo James is tatted, but they didn't have the same hair in my head. But the name Theo, that was where I like made the connection. But I'm dying. Alex from Love Island UK season 3. That's epic.
Thank you.
No, really epic. Okay, wait, who was Bennett in your head? Do you have a face?
I don't have a face for him. Okay. I'm so bad with like actors and stuff like that. But
okay.
No, Bennett, cinnamon roll, like you said, such a great word for him. He is on the outside, chaotic, frantic, doing 17 things at once and doing them all better than you, like super high achiever.
Yeah.
But on the inside, he's just like this really sweet, caring, thoughtful man. And so Bennett is Edie's twin sister's fiance's best friend from childhood. And so the 4 of them sort of form like a nice little like group of friends.
Yeah.
4-pack. And Bennett works in politics. He lost his brother when he was young, when he was in high school, to a school shooting. And that inspired him to become really passionate about gun reform. And so he got into politics through that. And so right now he's serving as the campaign manager for an up and coming congresswoman. And they sort of have a romance. Her name is Kiara, and Bennett and Kiara are sort of an item for most of the book. As she gets busier and busier with obviously running for office, it's time consuming. Their relationship falls apart, and he's the best man in Ray and Max's wedding. Edie is the maid of honor. And so they spend a lot of time together and they form a friendship. And writing their friendship was really wholesome.
Yeah.
It's just like very sweet, like to see these 2 people who were really, really different, but sort of, come together to lean on each other.
Yeah.
And then he ends up being the one. She develops really strong feelings for him. And she has this moment where she just is like, oh my God, and like looks at him in a different way. And for, I don't know, maybe the last couple chapters of the book, she is really struggling to figure out, can I pursue this person, even if he isn't the one that I met on the right day? She met him, I think it's like 3 days later.
Right. There's so many crazy, like interesting parts to this whole relationship, but I love I love the whole concept behind like them knowing each other and being friends with one another. And then all of a sudden it's like light switches in her head and she's like, wait, could you be the one? Cause I feel like so many people have these moments with other people in their lives where you're just like, it's platonic until it isn't. And I just felt that like, especially in this book, it wasn't like she was with Theo and then all of a sudden started catching feelings for Bennett. And it was like a love triangle situation. It was very much like her realizing Theo was not her person and coming to terms with that and going to speak to Gloria like at her grave and trying to get some like clear, like ahead, like getting her head cleared. And then only then kind of being like, wait, like maybe it is Bennett. Like, I just like that was a very like authentic, organic experience. And it wasn't like messy or convoluted anyway. It was just very like natural and fair to everybody involved. So I feel like that I feel like it was written really, really well. And it's not like, it didn't leave me with a pit in my stomach is the best way I can say, the best way I can explain it. But I loved the ending, the twist.
Thank you.
I can't deal with it. totally left field. Like once we established Bennett's her person, I was like, okay, cute. Like, but how is it going to tie together? Like there's got to be some little tie. And you like you were taking me left and then you spun me right. Like I didn't know where we were going. So to tell everybody, I mean, everyone that's listening to this has obviously read the book, but let us know like how it ended and how you came up with this amazing ending. Cause it like gave me full body goosebumps.
Thank you. I love to make people cry. So that's a huge compliment.
Yeah. I was very emo, especially at the end.
So to backtrack, at the very beginning of the book, you learn that Gloria had her first vision when she's sitting next to her friend Ennett. And at the end of the book, it's Ray and Max's wedding, and Edie is there and Bennett is there. And Ennett is now in her 90s. And she calls over Edie and Bennett and they're talking to her. And she produces this photograph from her purse. And it's Gloria and Ennett and their partners. And then it's also Bennett's grandparents from way back in the day. And they all worked together. And Gloria was the one to set up Bennett's grandparents. And so even though she didn't meet Bennett on the right day, Gloria essentially like handpicked these two people who then, had this grandson that her granddaughter fell in love with. So yeah.
I actually have goosebumps again as you're telling me it. Like fully have goosebumps again. It's so like beautiful. And it's just like the circle of life. It's so crazy. And even though like her prophecy obviously wasn't accurate, like she still had such a heavy hand in picking like her like granddaughters, like Bashert, her meant to be, which is so beautiful in its own sense. And it just wraps the entire story together so nicely. And again, like she still got to make decisions for herself. She still chose free will and didn't just settle with Theo because that's what she thought her date needed to be. And that's how she had to settle. And she still found like her actual person that she's meant to be with. Like,
yeah. I like something that balanced at the end, like it is free will, but there's still like a touch of magic, a touch of fate, like just something there.
Yeah.
But the inspiration for it was there's this really amazing photo of my grandparents at prom in 1955. And it's just six kids, but they look, very glamorous because it's the 50s. Yeah. But, 3 couples. And that's the photo that I had in mind when I was writing this.
It's so crazy. I thought you were going to tell me, and like, my sister's boyfriend is one of the guys. And I was like, don't tell me that. No. Honestly, no.
But actually, my sister met a guy on an airplane and had a meet cute. And so I just stole that. And so that's Edie and Theo's cute on an airplane. So she actually met the guy on the plane, talked, whatever. And then they both had a weekend apart and then they were on the same plane coming back. And so God. I stole that for the book.
I love that. That's an epic meet cute. I just love travel meet cutes. And the fact that then they came back together, I was like, obviously like they're meant to be, like now they're being reunited. The whole thing was so good. I loved this book. I just genuinely loved it. And like, it's obviously totally a rom-com, but I love that it's just like a feel good story. It's not like too overly romancy or too overly comedy. Like it's a perfect blend. And it's just a great, happy, like you just feel good book. And it's so, I blitzed through it. I mean, I told you this before we started, like I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't put it down. And I really loved it. I really, really loved it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So tell me now, what is going on? What are you working on next? Like what's the next thing?
Yeah. So I have another book that I'm working on. I unfortunately can't talk about it right now.
Okay.
But I do have some events coming up. June 14th, I'm having an event in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Porter Square Books. And then on June 22nd, I'm doing a really fun panel with a bunch of other romance and rom-com writers. And that's going to be in Brooklyn. And that's with Georgia Clark, Nisha Sharma, and Hannah Jackson.
Amazing. That's awesome. And these are all in-person things.
Mm-hmm. In person.
That's amazing. Okay. Well, hopefully whoever's listening to this that's in the area will be able to come. I won't be there because I'll be in Canada, but I'll be there with you in spirit.
Thank you.
And I'm very excited to hear about this new book that you're working on. Whenever you're able to share, I'm all ears.
I would love to come back next time.
I would love to have you. I'm very excited. I've loved everything of yours that I've read. So I'm very excited to see what's next.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time. This was very, very fun.
We're the best. This was such a blast.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate you. All
right. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.